The next presentation is by Dr. Durrel Ramrathan. Is that the correct pronunciation? You can correct me shortly. Okay, he's a senior analytics and AI leader with an in-depth experience designing and implementing cognitive solutions. This is a gentleman that's done a lot of hands-on work himself. So it's going to be really interesting to hear what he has to say. He has an extensive consulting background, driving a number of large-scale advanced analytic solutions, as well as first-of-kind cognitive application implementers. In addition to pioneering AI in the industry, Durrel has contributed extensively to the academic field through research and publication in the attainment of his PhD. He leads the customer operations analytics and AI competency within MultiChoice, which has an intense focus on crafting innovative solutions to improve and evolve customer experience. Looking forward to your presentation. Peeps, thanks for coming up.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that great intro. It's almost as if I wrote it myself. Yeah, welcome everyone. It's great to be with you in person. And for those online, I'm sure you're looking just as fabulous sitting at home in your PJs. As our wonderful MC mentioned, I look after a number of machine learning and analytics teams at MultiChoice. And I think since my talk today is around customer experience largely, and it's quite different to lots of the things you may have heard and probably going to hear at the rest of the conference, I ask people I generally speak to, what would they love to see in my presentation? So one person responded, and they said they love to see lots and lots of slides, architectural diagrams, maybe throw in some ERDs. And so I'm here today to give my customers what they want. So I think fortunately for all of us, I'm very lazy to create slides, but I do have a confession to make. I won't be presenting any groundbreaking technology or mind-blowing innovation today. What I want to achieve today is to kickstart a shifting mindset of how we view customer experience within an organization, and how we shift our analytics efforts to partner with business to achieve customer outcomes rather than the outputs of the things that we do. Because too often we see that we let technology or innovation for the sake of innovation lead projects or programs and so on, without understanding the why, as we heard in the previous discussion, without understanding what we're trying to achieve for the customer and what's the successful customer outcome that we're trying to show. I usually start these presentations with a few key stats around customer experience and why it's so important. However, I think this is commonplace nowadays. Everybody understands why customer experience is important and why it's so beneficial to the organization. I think where most people get stuck is how do you create that value chain within an organization of aligning to customer experience and getting everybody in the organization to focus on customer experience rather than relegating it to the function of one specific team in an organization. So to start, I'd like everybody to think about a great customer experience they recently received and how it made you feel and how it changed your expectations moving forward, not just with that business. I'll give you an example for myself. Being a car enthusiast and having recently got a new car, I was looking for the best place to service my car. So naturally, as you do, you'd go online, look at reviews, social media. I asked my car club, and almost instantly, I got a whole bunch of people recommend a service manager in Roodepoort. So I decided to take my car there. And normally when you take your car for a service, you'll generally take it to a place that's close to your home or close to work. While I was there, I noticed that there were people from much farther out from the vicinity and having braved the morning Joburg traffic to actually get there. So what was so special about this place? From the moment I walked in, although it was very busy, the staff made sure that they made me feel comfortable and made me feel like I was the only person at the time. I think importantly at that point is they also ensured that I got to where I needed to go most efficiently, because one of the most important needs at the time is how do I get to work on time? So they ensured that they had enough transport and stuff available to get me to where I needed to go. In addition to keeping me updated throughout the service and so on, when I got, they took the time to explain everything to me. Although they were very busy, they didn't rush the interaction, and they ensured that interaction was valuable for both myself and them. What was the result What was the result of this? We learn from shared experiences. So the word of mouth for them would be exponential. In addition, as the quote goes, people will always remember how you made them feel. And they almost instantly created a loyal customer, being myself, for them. So while I had a great experience in that interaction, unfortunately, when I got the post-service survey call, I wasn't able to answer any of the calls because generally they phone when you're at work or I'm trying to get stuff out, so I couldn't share my great experience. Couldn't share my great experience with them. What was the point of actually sharing the story? I think it provides lots of context for what we'll be discussing today, and lots of the items will be able to relate back to parts of the story. And I think it also brings up another important sort of question is, how many of us actually believe that we have an impact on the customer? Many of us don't even think about the customer or don't believe we have a direct impact on the customer because we may not work in a department that directly interfaces with the customer or influences anything for the customer in our view. However, if you think about the journey a customer goes through with your organization, that journey is supported by a number of pillars, and each one of us fall within those pillars that support that journey in some way. So invariably, we have some sort of impact in delivering something for the customer, even though we may not be directly involved in that interaction, but everything we do contributes to some sort of process that informs the customer journey and then ultimately influences that customer journey. If you think back to the example that I gave, I expect to be that segment of one wherever I may not realize that expectation, but I have that expectation, not only for car dealerships, but any other business that I visit. So if you think about it, the experience that you deliver to your customers is the experience that they're comparing to the likes of Apple, Google, Facebook, and so on. And they're comparing it to that expectation. And we know that customers will go through more effort or pay more for better experience because they feel that they're able to connect to the brand and the brand is able to understand them more. And therefore, they have that level of comfort and are willing to engage with that specific brand. And if you think of how customer expectations have evolved over time, with the introduction of various technologies and digitization and so on, it's shifted the expectations. It's also shifted how they interact with us, as well as how they measure us. And that shift has caused a problem with many traditional sort of organizations because business still measures itself the way it's always measured itself. So while these metrics are important, they may not necessarily be aligned to what the customer expects or the evolving need of the customer. And what this causes is a divide because business is focusing on one thing and what your customers expect or need is on the other side. So it's creating a divide. And what happens when this divide creates? It creates opportunity for disruption because as business is working away from customer needs, it creates an opportunity or unmet customer needs where other players are able to come in the market and deliver on that. So it creates an opportunity for disruption. So on the term of disruption, when you traditionally think of companies that are disruptive, companies like Airbnb, Apple, Uber, Amazon, and so on, their primary mechanism of disruption was disrupting the experience for their customers, more so than any technology that they implemented. They ensured that they delivered a superior experience to their customers, an experience that customers didn't know that actually wanted or actually needed at the time. What they also did was they're able to shift their business models and ways of work to ensure that they deliver on that customer need. So essentially working backwards from what the customer need is and ensuring that their business processes and teams are aligned to delivering on that. And what that ensured was, it ensured that everybody in the organization was aligned to delivering on that customer need. And I think this is where the data and analytic teams have a very important role to play because they're able to deliver that customer insight and customer insight into the behaviors and how behaviors are evolving and changing as customers interact with us and as they go through the various journeys with us. And we're able to highlight the bottlenecks and so on in the various journeys. However, for me, I think that's the easier part of the story. I think the tougher thing is to understand how we get people to conceptualize how they impact the customer at the end of the day. And I sit in lots of technical, insight, data discussions, and so on, where on the one side, we're trying to resolve something for the customer. But on the other side, for example, we have technical teams where we can't run this extract now. It's going to put too much pressure on my box. We need to run it after hour, and so on. But there's a customer issue that we need to resolve now. So clearly, you have, on the one side, you have a team that's measured on maybe system uptime, whereas the other team is measured on resolving something from the customer. And you have people in the same organization working against each other and creating unhealthy tension. And this was one of the first places that we started, specifically with our data teams, in terms of getting them out of just the thing that they do, getting them out of the domain so they understand the bigger picture that's playing out within the organization. So ensuring that they understand what customer experience is, how it flows through the organization, as well as how what they do impacts that customer experience. And by doing that, we're able to ensure that they move from being a mere sort of support function to the business to being a strategic advisor to the business. Because now they can partner with business to solve customer problems rather than just churning out extracts, dashboards, and so on request. So the data teams were able to, because we understand how data flows through an organization, we're able to contextualize that experience for the organization, because the context is important, right? And provide that bigger picture of how customers are interacting with the organization, so that can then inform sort of our product and service decisions moving forward, as well as how we design our journeys and so on. And one of the key things that actually kickstarted this, in addition with trying to shift people's mindsets, was ensuring that people were aligned on how they are measured. And this was a key one for us as well. And I'll give you an example that we use in customer experience training, is that of a car manufacturing company in the United States. On the one side, they were producing cars very efficiently. So they're very efficient at producing cars. They were outperforming all of the production metrics and so on. So they were great on that side. However, on the sales side, they weren't able to actually sell these cars because for whatever reason, it didn't meet a customer need. So while on the one side, the company thought it was doing really great, overall, it wasn't that successful because they weren't aligned in terms of what were they trying to focus on. And this was very key for us to ensure, and like our previous example, to ensure everyone's focused on the right things. And if you go back to the slide we mentioned on the traditional metrics, to ensure people are also focused on what does success mean for your customer. So we're driving towards the right thing as well. I think this also brings up another key question, which is, how do you actually measure customer experience? Traditionally, we have our traditional metrics that's around Net Promoter Score, customer effort score, customer satisfaction, and so on. There are traditional metrics that are used to measure customer experience. And I generally have an issue with relying solely on these measures because I feel that they tell a very small portion of the entire experience. They also have a number of biases because being survey-based measures and so on, there's a number of biases that's inherent in there. And I think using them solely to tell the story of the experience that customers are going through, you're only going to look at a fraction of what's actually happening. In addition to that, what customers say and what customers actually mean or need may be two different things. I'll give you another example that we use in customer experience training, is that of Disney. So Disney record lots of the voice interactions in their theme parks for training and improvement purposes and so on. So when they analyzed that information, they found that one of the most common questions that were coming up was, what time is the 3 o'clock parade? So it may sound as like a silly question, right? When they dug a bit deeper, they actually found it was families with kids that came in. They were tired, they were stressed after a long journey, and they wanted to know, where was the nearest restroom on the route, where was the nearest place to eat, and where was the best place to actually view the parade with the family. So although they didn't come out and say that, that's actually what they needed. And it's a classic example of how we use verbatims from surveys and stuff, which may lead us astray. I also think we ask customers lots of questions that we should know the answers to as well. So, for example, if we've designed a process, and this is a simplistic view, if we design a process for a customer to come in, activate, and start using, and we've designed it to take 2 minutes or 5 steps, and it's within that time, we can assume that, okay, it's working as it should work. However, if that process takes 30 minutes, we don't then need to go and ask the customer, please tell me how your experience was with us. We can immediately tell this wasn't a great experience for the customer, and we can investigate and do what we need to do. And I think this is where the data and analytics teams also have a very important role to play, because we understand that how data flows in the organization, better than anybody else. And if you look at a customer journey is essentially made up of a number of processes, and each processes have a number of interactions in them, and each of those interactions is a data point. And while we're not able to measure all of the interactions, all of the data points, for those that we can, we're able to tell how certain processes are doing, and ultimately how the journeys are doing against how it was designed. And by doing so, we're then able to inform the actual experience that customers are actually going through. And using this with some of the traditional metrics, we're able to then have a much richer picture of what's happening in the organization, rather than relying on some of the traditional stuff. We went through quite a few items here today, and each one of them could essentially be a talk on its own. But I think it's important to stitch all of this together, because I think as data people, we get so stuck in the technical space. Sometimes we forget that there's an end customer at the end of the day, or there's a bigger picture that we're trying to drive towards. So I think it's important to be able to shift that mindset, because more so than anything else, the people are going to be the most important asset, more so than any technology or any BI tool that you're going to implement. And having them drive this change or the shift, specifically in the things that they do and the interactions that they have within the organization, is going to be your biggest lever for success, rather than trying to throw in some tools to help you or throw in a specific program and so on, to try and change that mindset of the people that work and gear them towards successful customer outcomes rather than just mere outputs of the things that they do. Before we close off here today, I'd like to walk you through a project that we implemented at MultiChoice. So a few years back, we wanted to implement an agent assist bot. So basically, this was to assist our agents and provide them information very quickly so that they can interact with the customer. We were very clear on the problem statement that we were trying to drive. And during implementation and production and so on, our system was stable for the amount of users that we had. We had very low error rates in terms of the dialogue flows, and NLP was working as it should. So we thought we were great, good to go. However, when we actually launched it, we saw the adoption was very low. When we dug a bit further, we noticed that, and the customer in this sense was our agents serving our end customer. And we noticed that the responsive wasn't conducive or structured in a way that was actually helpful for them, for end customer on the line. They weren't actually using it because it wasn't really helpful. It wasn't making that process more efficient for them. So we went back to the drawing board. We fixed that. Almost immediately, we saw the adoption of it increase. We also saw key customer metrics improve, such as first interaction resolution, the amount of time they spend on the interaction with us so that they're able to get back to watching, as well as we're able to train agents much quicker. So again, this is a classic example of, as we mentioned previously, of misaligned measurements, where we are focused lots on technology being great. Ultimately, we weren't really focused on what was going to be great for the customer or end customer in this scenario. So we were able to take those learnings and implement it in our customer-facing chatbot that we then launched. And in this implementation, we started with what was a customer need, and how do we structure the bot to be able to deliver, to get the customer from the time they start interacting with us to that endpoint as quickly as possible, and reduce as much customer effort as possible and internalize lots of the customer effort. And when we talk about customer effort, we're talking about ensuring that we don't ask customers things that we should know the answer to, or information that we should actually know, right? So able to streamline that process as much as possible, so that they're able to get to their specific successful outcome in the quickest way possible, because that for us was one of our key focus areas. And I think what we saw from there when we launched, we saw great uptake from our customers for the specific bot, and it continues to be one of our biggest interaction channels and best performing interaction channels. I think in addition to that, what we also did was, like we discussed previously around ensuring that we align measurements, what we did was we ensured that everybody was measured according to the same things. So no matter what department you came from, whether you were a product owner, knowledge management specialist, a developer, and so on, everyone was measured around customer outcomes in terms of first interaction resolution, accuracy of the content, dialogue dropout rates, and so on. What this ensured that everybody was focused on delivering the best solution for the customer rather than delivering the best solution for themselves or their specific domains. And the proof was in the pudding, ensuring that the system was launched and delivered on time, and it met the customer need at that point. And the uptake was great. We close off here today. What I'd like to leave you with is, in a world that's continually evolving with new technology, new trends, and so on, all we're trying to do for our customers is leave them better off after each interaction that they have with us. And as a data and analytics community, ensuring that we partner with business to become strategic advisors rather than just a mere support team. So we're able to focus on customer problems and customer outcomes, because no matter what you do in an organization, you will invariably have some sort of impact on the customer. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Durrel. A lot of interesting points to consider there, and while we all have customers, it's important that we reiterate some of these concepts. Yeah. Anybody got any questions from the floor or from online? Everybody knows their customers.
Perfect.
So one of the things that I took out of this is the business aligning with the customer in terms of the experience. I work for a corporate, and it's very seldom you find that the corporate aligns with the customer's success in that space. So that's something that is often a recurring theme, I think, with a lot of corporate. And most of the corporates have customer centricity as one of their points. And it's always interesting to try and unpack and understand what exactly that means. And I think that's a kind of a challenge that we all have in the corporate space. But I think what I'm trying to say is that even within that realm, the customer, as everybody sees it, may actually change. Yeah. So within a corporate, the end customer doesn't necessarily have to be seen as the customer. If you're passing something down from one department to another, that department is your customer, even internally. And I think it's quite important that if people start seeing other people like that, the person you're giving information to is your customer, and you treat them like everybody wants to be treated as a customer, then perhaps the flow is better. And organizations don't have to turn themselves on their heads to do things, just change some of their culture. Would you agree with that kind of thinking?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think, like you mentioned, in large corporates, they generally say they're trying to be customer centric and so on, but they leave it with one department there and be like, okay, you sort it out for us. But more so than anything else, it's like we mentioned, it's a shift in mindset. You don't need to revamp the whole organization and so on, because it's not practical, especially for big organizations. And that's why certain startups do really well, because they were able to start on this concept of focusing on the customer and build the organization around that. So the mindset was focused, whether it's internal or external, around customer outcomes, whether it's outcome for the internal customer, outcome for the external customer. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is getting people out of their boxes or their domains and be able to shift their mindset. Because I think it's easier to deliver some insight and so on around what's happening in the organization, to develop the trends and so on. But then focusing and telling that story in the context of the customer, and how the customer is flowing through the organization. That's the hard part, because generally as technical or data teams, sometimes we may sit in our certain box and we churning out stuff without the context of sometimes the business and out the context of the customer that we're trying to deliver for. And understanding their context adds so much value in the stuff that we're going to deliver, and makes us move on from supporting them to partnering with them.
No, certainly. And I think one of the key things in all of that, you mentioned it, and I think it was a theme through a lot of what you're talking about, is understanding what the success is for your customer. So if that's an internal thing, move it, getting the next step. But ultimately, we all need to understand what is success for our customers. And that, if you can work back from there, then you're in a far better position than most.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's another thing as well, because although sometimes we support lots of people and we have lots of stakeholders, we don't generally take the time to go to them and be like, what outcome are you trying to drive? And then help them to drive towards that outcome. Because sometimes, even with internal customers, they may not know what they need, right? Because they don't understand the data space. They don't understand what data is available, what tools, techniques are available, what visualizations are available. And that's for us to partner with them and help them along that journey, rather than just dishing out some of stuff and throwing it over to them, and it's their problem after that.
No, certainly. It's very easy just to throw technology at the problem and hope that it lands and sticks. Yes, there was a question.
Yes. Hi, Doctor.
Thank you.
Great presentation. Just a question. How do you change the mindsets of particularly the executives, where traditionally we've been very product-centric or relationship-based, and trying to change their minds or trying to get them to understand that we need to understand the client's needs in order to meet our bottom line. Yet if the current way of doing things is working, how do you get to them to see that actually it's going to change? The future will be us being more client-centric. How do you get them to shift? And no offense to the executives that are in the room, but how do you get them to shift away from product centricity or relationship centric model to being more model client centric?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, it's so hard for us to put ourselves in a customer persona. And specifically for the management level, if something is working, you don't need to touch it. And I'm sure some of the other companies like Blockbuster and so on also thought the same thing until it was too late. So what we found was, and the first steps that we took, and I think lucky for us, executive was on board before we were. The first step that we took was, one, to get customer experience training. So people understand the concepts that we're talking about. So when you're talking about these concepts, it's not foreign to someone. They're like, I don't understand what you're talking about, because then you can't relate. Everyone needs to be on the same level. What we also did, we proved our point by doing as well. So people won't generally just follow you along if you say, okay, come with me. What we did was, specifically for other areas, other executives and so on, we showed the value of focusing on customer success, whether it was internal or external for certain projects and programs and so on, and showed the value of how that performed versus how it performed previously. And by doing, you're able to get them on board much quicker, rather than just showing them a presentation or showing them some stats and so on, because that can only go so far.
I would like to maybe just add a little something in that as well, is that from my experience with customers, one of the good ways of getting an exec to hear the customer story is take your exec to a customer. So set up meetings for your execs with customers, and you can target your large ones, take them over there, because those are the ones that they don't want to lose. And if you work with your customer, sometimes they can help you get your message across. So get your exec to an exec meeting with a customer, and you'll be amazed how things can sometimes change mindsets.
Yeah, 100%. I think that was also one of the things that we do. When we're trying to fix a certain area and you get pushback from an exec, you actually take them, in our context, take them to a branch or service center and make them go through the process that the customer is going through, so they understand. Because if you're sitting in your office, you're not truly understanding what, the effort that the customer has to go through to interact with you, right? Because they're there to give you their money. So you need to make it as seamless as possible to get that and leave them better off after that interaction as well, so they come back.
Yeah, that's where brings home one of those bugbears we have in Cape Town, is where the road should be closed during the opening of Parliament. People should sit in the traffic as well, like the rest of us. No, all good. Righty, anybody else? Any other questions before we close? We know we're standing between you and lunch. And I think lunch is winning.
That's why I finished early.
Thanks very much, Dr. Durrel.